Good afternoon, Mr. Drane and Ms Natale. Thank you very much for giving your time this afternoon. I know you're preparing the school ready for Monday. You'll know that we've been doing a series of conversations to support parents and indeed our school community in preparing to come back to school. And one of the things I found really interesting, I was speaking to Mr. Drane, who's the English lead in the school, is what kind of things can parents do at home that really can contribute to improvements in their children's language and their writing and their reading. And Ms Natale, I know you've been doing a lot of work for Reading for Pleasure Culture in the school and have expanded your repertoire of literature considerably over the last few months. Mr. Drane, you came up with some really insightful information from your research. Would you like to share that screen as a starting point?
Yeah, certainly.
Great, off you go.
Yeah, so I was really interested in this information because it told a really good story actually about humanity and educational achievement over the last 100 years or so. If you think about in 1900, only around 20% of the world were literate. So it's been a huge achievement to drive that number to drive the number up to increase literacy rates across the world. So now we've got, actually in 2020, the latest statistics are that there's 86% literacy across the world. So quite an incredible achievement we should be very proud of. But how can we improve on that? Because in England particularly, there's a gap that widens across the course of a child's educational career, the data seems to suggest. So from even in the early years, between someone that's from a word-rich environment, this is not necessarily talking about disadvantage in terms of socioeconomic, but from a word and vocabulary environment, children are already 4.3 months behind the average curve, and that widens as we go through school. So really what I wanted to ask the question of this data is how can we reduce that gap, and how can we bring the importance of words and vocabulary to life? Because there's this quote here that we experienced some professional development last week from Mark Rowland, and he said this here: the language gap is the attainment gap. So this idea that children talking in school and using their words in writing and reading, how we get that across within school and at home as well can really improve a child's level of attainment. So for example, a teenager who's got sort of reasonably good GCSEs, a conservative estimate says that they'd know 80,000 words by the time they've passed their GCSEs. If they're going to start doing that now, my daughter's 1. If she starts now, she needs to learn 13 words every day to average out to even achieve that. So many people think 100,000 is a target number, and this is not to suggest that we should be having a list of words and go, right, these are your 13 for the day. It's really just to bring to life the idea that a varied and wonderful vocabulary would improve children's life chances no end, because they can, if you know more words, you can understand more concepts and you can link together ideas more effectively. You're much better at dialogue and collaboration. So just naming things and describing things in greater detail. The research seems to suggest that this brings out far greater opportunity. So it's just really interested in that.
Thanks. A conference at, I think, Cambridge Assessment, and there was an academic there who'd done a lot of research in her 70-year career. And she said that the one thing that parents could do that would make a difference is turn the pram to face the parent, rather than the pram facing away from the parent. By turning the pram towards the parent, the child and parent can see each other speaking. And some parents are saying, well, they can't see what's going on, but that's not the point. The point is to talk about the experiences and what they can see around them. It goes exactly to what you were saying there just now. Ms Natale, you've done a lot of reading recently.
Yeah, so I have spent a lot of money on books, but I think you don't need to go and spend a lot of money to be able to get all that vocabulary that Mr. Drane was talking about. So I've got 3 books here and 3 points to kind of share. So one of them is called A Child of Books. And basically the message is read anything that you find around the house. So it shouldn't be just books. I've been reading lots of recipes lately, the news, apps with like positive quotes in the morning. So that's reading, and that builds that vocabulary and it gets that conversation going. The second book I have is called Word Collectors, because I think when we walk around, we could do word collecting. And I've got a little journal book that I've started doing, and I just write words that come to mind. Or if I read a book and I don't understand a word, I write it down, look it up in the dictionary, and maybe someday I'll reuse it. Who knows? So be word collectors. And then the third thing is that we are a very diverse community. So it is important that we keep all languages going. So I've got a book in Italian here, a series of National Geographic books that I've ordered. And I think it's important for everyone to just read in all languages, and actually remember that art can be a form of reading if you then have the dialogue about it. So 3 things I do are fill my house with post-it notes for new words. And obviously because I speak different languages, I do that with French, Italian and English. Play lots of board games. So I Spy, Articulate, even Pictionary or Charades as a family. That's a nice game to play around the table that builds that vocabulary. And even in the evening when you're sharing about your day, I remember doing this when I was a child, go around and everyone says a word and build a sentence together about your day and your feelings. So you could say a noun, Mr. Drane, I'll say an adjective, and you can say a verb, Dr Biddulph, and we've got a sentence there, and we're building that rich vocabulary, and we're sharing and communicating together. So there you go, just some ideas.
You know, it also it goes to the heart of as Mr. Drane said, about the more words you have, the better you can understand concepts, and then therefore the better you're able to kind of argue ideas. And I was really shocked by the OECD that said that it's something like 9% of children and young people up to secondary school age, only 9% can distinguish between fact and opinion. I mean, that's really appalling, isn't it? That it's because they haven't, the language hasn't been, maybe the language is not rich enough for children and young people to say what is the difference between fact and opinion. You know, then you've got the challenges of online learning and online profiles and social media and fake news and misinformation. It's a challenge there. So this conversation is really good. Mr. Drane, anything else you'd like to add about, why is it so important?
I think we've covered a little bit about why. I think maybe the practical strategies would be quite useful. So I think what Ms Natale was saying there in terms of collecting words, and I think celebrating difficult words as well, because sometimes we speak to children and we try and simplify things. I think addressing complex ideas is really useful. So I think from experience over the last few weeks with the online learning, I think we did a unit on dystopia, and now whenever I hear children use that word, they're sort of understanding it a lot more, and I sort of see it on the news, and I can understand why it's so important that they understand words such as that, because it means they can engage with those sorts of arguments and viewpoints that people are putting across. I think in terms of reading as well, so you could really focus in on words. So for example, if you picked out, you could say, why is a particular character selfish? And then you could start thinking about different meanings of the word selfish and different interpretations. So could a selfish person ever be kind? Can you give an example of that? Is another character, could they be unselfish? And then start playing around with those sorts of things, getting children excited about different meanings of words, but also the relationship between words as well and where they come from. So different etymologies, if you have different languages at home, the different links and connections. I was listening to a podcast the other day actually about how the machine learning had sort of mapped loads of language across the world, and you think there was this huge sort of diversity, but they sort of put it into this big language cloud to try and understand the commonalities, but there are these shared connections more than we ever understand between different languages. So I think if we have diverse languages being spoken at home as well, to continue to make connections between those would be really useful. Now, I was gonna link to that as well and just say if you're online and you want to follow different accounts, like there's accounts on Twitter like Susie Dent from Countdown. She talks about vocabulary all the time. There's an account called Haggard Hawks, which is HAGGARD and then HAWKS, and they talk about sort of strange things and etymological tales, so to get children excited about words. So for example, talks about the earliest known record of the word breakdance comes from a man named Robert Breakdance in 1332, and originally it meant turbulent or hot-tempered. So even just in that tweet that was just an hour ago, there's quite a lot to unpick there.
And you can see the link between that
breakdancing
and
in the Olympics now, those sorts of things. We can start talking about concepts, and there's just loads of things on there. Like the Oxford English Dictionary, you could look on there if you wanted to. And games, like Ms Natale was saying, I think just to finish off on what I wanted to talk about there, you could talk about things like playing word or not words. So is something beautiful or not beautiful, or delightful or not delightful, or hilarious or not hilarious, those sorts of things. You could read out a list of things and play games, because there's during lockdown, I think playing those sorts of things have kept people sane, I think. Yeah, so just to keep that word focus. But overall, reading and talking are the best things that we could possibly do to keep exposing children to those vocabulary.
Yeah, so we know that as well as parents worrying about their children's kind of mental health and their physical health and going back to school and feeling good about themselves again and their self-esteem, parents are also worried about the great catch-up, as the government keeps talking about the catch-up, which is not language that's helpful. But this video is really helpful, because one thing, parents, you can do is play with words, use your language, and find words, as I said, collect words, play games, and just see where that takes you, because it's one thing that you can do all the time in those moments of your free time, in between washing and cooking and cleaning and all those other things. You talk, so we can use the language, and that would be really key. If there's one thing you can do, is read and play with words. Thank you, and back to work.
Yeah. Bye.